Welcome back to TinyBlueGames. My name's of course Seesaw or Chris, and today we are talking about MMORPGs in 2020. We have another MMO comparison video for you today that's going to be focused on character creation, so get ready to abuse those slider bars because we're about to get creative. Just before we get into it though, if you did miss our last video in this series, we were talking about which MMORPG was the best value in 2020. If you did miss it, I'll put a little card up in the top of the screen. You can go check it out if it interests you at all. If you had seen it, you're probably interested in seeing some of the poll results for that video. It's about 2 weeks old now, so this is what the poll looks like. You can see that GuildWars 2 is performing very well, as along with Final Fantasy XIV. Now, to be fair, I do have a lot of Final Fantasy XIV subscribers, as well as GuildWars 2 subscribers, so those numbers are probably a little bit elevated by that, but that's kind of an inconsistency that will diminish as the video gets more and more views. So as we do updates, and I plan to do updates of all of these polls and keep sort of using them in different videos as we progress, we should see the numbers change throughout the months. But yeah, so if you are interested in staying up to date with this kind of stuff, feel free to drop a subscribe. We'd love to have you. And with all this said, there is going to be another poll in this video. So be sure to stay to the end or skip to the end now and put your vote there if you want. But I'd love to hear your opinion. Yeah, that's right. Someone on the internet wants to hear your opinion about games. This is your time to shine. Alright, and finally you're probably wondering which MMOs we're going to be comparing today. We're going to keep the list fairly similar to the previous video. The only game I'm going to remove, and I chose to remove a game because YouTube's polls only allow for 5 answers. I learned my lesson in the last video. We're going to remove Old School RuneScape because I feel like of all the topics, character creation can be handled by the other games a bit better, and there's certain other topics that I think Old School RuneScape will do better with. And then there's obviously the conversation about Old School RuneScape's character creation versus RuneScape 3's character creation. Yeah, so I decided it was just better to remove it, and that leaves us with Guild Wars 2, Final Fantasy XIV, The Elder Scrolls Online, World of Warcraft Retail, and Black Desert Online. Alrighty, so we're going to work our way through these different games in a very similar method so that we kind of keep it consistent. We're going to start by going through all of the different races that you are able to play in the game, both the male and female option when that's available, and then we'll choose one of the races that I typically think are the more exciting race, or at least one of the races that I enjoy customizing the most, and then we'll kind of go through the customization process and see what kind of options you have. So we're starting with Guild Wars 2. The nice thing about Guild Wars 2 is that all of the races can be all of the different classes. I think that's one of the best parts of any MMO, when you have the true freedom to mix and match and do kind of very obvious combinations, and then very strange combinations as well. I think that's really nice. Guild Wars 2 also does a really nice job of showing different presets with each of the different classes when you come in here. I think they do a very good job of having sort of presets that make sense with the actual class, or at least that's what I think whenever I select one. I've never actually gone through and tried to see if it is always the same one that is shown or not, but you know, like when you go to the Norn and you click on Thief, typically you end up with like a smaller Norn that might be a Thief. Azura are one of my favorite Guild Wars 2 races. A lot of games have smaller people, but I think these ones are more mousy than a lot of other games, which is pretty cool. And you can actually make them look pretty normal as well if you're trying to do just like a you know, kind of a gnome kind of hybrid looking character. You can kind of achieve that, but you are gonna probably have some weird eyes and some weird ears. My other favorite class in, race in Guild Wars 2 is the Sylvari, or the Salad People. They're pretty cool, like lore-wise, but they also just have a lot of different colors that you can mix together. I spend forever trying to get all of the different, like, colors on your skin and leaves and like all your foliage to match and look all pretty, and then I do all of that, and it's usually mostly covered by armor anyways, but I like to know that I'm pretty underneath, so I always go back to my character and I get them in my underwear, and that's where I start. And you can really play around with the lighting to kind of get a better sense of the colors too, in the kind of like night versus day, which is really nice. Use some very general kind of like body shapes you can go for. If you want to be kind of a muscular piece of salad or a tubbier salad, you have those options. I like how they're like, you know, wearing leaves over top of their leaves to kind of keep themselves decent. It's a weird option, but I guess it makes sense. But you can see here just all the different options you have for face patterns, for like skin patterns, and for the colors of those patterns. You can really go crazy and make yourself look quite stand out, which is really nice. I also like this mushroom hat. The amount of times I've been killed by like a thief wearing this mushroom, it's not even a hat. It feels like it's a hat, but it's part of your body in PvP. It happens a lot. I don't know if they like just have like a guild where you have to wear those mushroom hats and like kill people in the streets, but it happens to me way more than it to be just a coincidence. So yeah, you have a lot of different looks that you can go with, and I think it's a lot of fun to kind of mix and match. The ears as well are really cool because they kind of look like different sort of flower petals or like tulips and stuff like that, which is really cool. And then you have a lot of sliders when it comes to the finer details on your face in terms of your size and the different shapes of your like eyebrows and your eyes and how big they're going to be. That's where most of the customization happens. And it's fair because a lot of the other stuff is covered by armor. It's typically going to be the head you see. And this one here in GuildWars 2, they actually do have a head size scale that does a fair bit of like difference. That's been one of the biggest ones I've played with to make some interesting characters. One of my favorite things to do is actually play an Azura and do a really big head, and it kind of makes a bobblehead kind of effect, which is pretty fun. But yeah, so there's a lot of stuff you can do, and you do get to do your sort of beginner gear with dyes that you want to make yourself all pretty and matchy. And then you create your background story, which gives you a kind of unique piece of gear and gives you a feel for who your character is if you want to get to know yourself, right? Because that's what we're here for. We're here to develop backstories and really fit into the world, and I think Guild Wars 2 does a really good job of doing that for us. Alright, so moving on from Guild Wars 2, we have Final Fantasy XIV, where you do have quite the selection of races once again, and I believe all of the races can be all of the jobs because, you know, you can have all of the jobs on one character, which is a discussion for another video. But yeah, you have a lot of different races, a good mix of kind of normal looking races and then some that don't look very normal. You also have a nice mix of cutesy races and races that are more satanic and races that are more just, you know, your traditional fantasy sort of elves and stuff like that. So it's got a good mix of, you know, something that everyone's going to want. I think that's a big thing that games need to offer, because it's really hard to bring friends to a game when you know they're going to hate every single race that's in the game. For instance, and this is one of the worst case scenarios in my mind, I always think of Terra. They added a really, really cool class with these kind of dual blades. And for the longest time, the chain dual blades, you could only play on the like little girl with it. And I think that might even still be the case. I'm not sure. I haven't played Terra in forever, but it really kind of ruined the class because I didn't want to play as that race. So it's unfortunate. But yeah, speaking of little girls, you have the Lalafels, which is quite popular in Final Fantasy XIV. You do have the traditional more elf-looking people, and then the humans as well. And there's a female counterpart for a lot of these and male counterpart for a lot of these, but there are two races that are locked as either female and male at the bottom there. So one thing to be aware of. When you do choose the actual race, there is a little variant of clans, and there's obviously lore implications with this. Not that I think it really impacts your actual gameplay too much in terms of like being able to do the main things in the game. There might be some little things that change, I'm not sure, but there is a little bit of variant in the way your character looks, as you can kind of see when you go into that as well. But yeah, so like I say, there are the races that are locked from male and female, and I think that's really unfortunate too, because, you know, you'd almost prefer them to have done just the one race and taken the time to do the male and female, but it's what it is. We're going to move ahead with a Lalafell, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm actually not a Lalafell on my main account. I kind of have regret about that, and I think everyone who didn't choose a Lalafell to begin with has regret about not choosing that. I actually laughed out loud making this video when I chose to remove the clothing, and he was like, "Whoa, my underwear's out." It was so funny. I actually kept him on like this emote thing for a while, and it was too much. I turned it off eventually, so don't worry, because it's a little bit hard to watch when you're going through it at like 2 times or 3 times speed. But it's pretty funny when you're actually doing the character creation. So you do have a lot of different hairs for them, and they feel very different with the hair. Like this, you do get quite the different feeling from someone with a big poof of hair or this weird almost bald head. Like there's a lot of different customization you have there. The hair, you have the 2 tones, which is really nice. You can really work in some highlights and lowlights, which I think gives a lot of dimension, whereas a lot of hair in some of the more dated MMOs feels very clumpy, like it's just a blob on your head. This makes things feel light and fuzzy. Like, wouldn't you just want to rub your like face on that like head, like a sheep or something, like just rub against it? I would. In terms of nose options and stuff, you actually don't have a ton to do with the face. The actual face structure is very similar amongst all of them, which is interesting because, like I say, there's a lot of options of the head in terms of like hair, and then you go to the face and there's a lot of little things you can do, but not big changes. And I guess that kind of does a good job of keeping them looking like Lalafels, whereas in Guild Wars 2, your Azuras can look pretty different if you stretch things out a lot, which, is kind of fun. One of my biggest surprises was that you could put facial hair on these guys, because I imagine them as like children, but they're fully grown. So you can be kind of like a senior, like little person, and oh my god, like I have my next character planned out. I'm not gonna lie to you. He's gonna be a little Lalafell with a beard who is just adorable but also wise. And you don't need to question those things because that's just what life is. And then you can choose the different emotes and you're good to go. So you do have some background information like your astral moon and stuff like that, just to give yourself a little bit of lore explanation. And then you actually do choose your class afterwards. I said that everyone can be the same class, which is cool, but it's actually the class and not the race that decides where you start in Final Fantasy XIV, which is pretty different compared to a lot of other MMOs. And I was pretty confused about that at the beginning, but it's a pretty cool way of doing things. So you can definitely go to the same place on different races if you're the same class, which is cool. You also get to preview a lot of the different class armors and see what you look like. Moving on, we have World of Warcraft. It's actually been so long since I've been through all the different races in WoW, and this is definitely one of the race sections that I had to speed up the most. So if you see the background animations being weird, that's kind of why. But the big part about this is that there's a lot of actual races that you get in the game, and then you get a bunch of allied races, which are kind of things they've been adding later on. It should be noted that the Shadowlands expansion is going to upgrade a lot of this, and we'll have to do kind of a follow-up video eventually, but I figured it was worth doing that because it's still a ways out, and they're changing things all the time. So we may as well give an impression of what things are as they stand in 2020, and we'll move on from there. I mean, if I always wanted to do something, and stopped because an MMO might change something in the future, well, it would be a lot of back and forth, wouldn't it? So you have quite the selection of different classes. If you've never played or heard of WoW, you have the Horde and the Alliance, and then you have sort of a neutral race that chooses their allegiance afterwards called the Pandaren. And you have very distinct, very classic kind of fantasy roles. And now moving on to the allied races, these are races that you unlock in different ways in the game. Typically there is a rep grind that might go away in the future, and some sort of quest chain associated with them. And they range from like recolors of different races to even unique races, as we'll see kind of at the bottom here with the Kulturan and the Mechanomes and Volpera. They look quite unique. And pretty fun to play with. You can make some very unique looking characters with a lot of these, which I think is fun. And it's just a tremendous amount of choice when you think about it. Though it should be mentioned that the classes are locked to specific races in WoW. There's quite a big selection, but there are certain classes that you cannot do on certain races. And that typically does get changed as expansions come out. But it's worth noting. Look how cute that Volpera is. Look how fuzzy he is. So fuzzy. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to customize an undead. For some reason, I feel like they're one of the more unique races to WoW, and I don't really have any solid argument to that, but there's some pretty cool options you can do. That being said, the customization is the weaker part of WoW if you're going to look at the amount of races kind of as the positive here. You can't customize them too much. There's typically one kind of gimmicky area that you're able to customize when it comes to each of these. For instance, for the undead, you can do a fair bit for the hair, but it's really when it comes to the mouth that you're able to do a lot, or the face, I guess, if you'd call it. In here, they call it the features. So there's kind of a features section for a lot of these, and that gives you a lot of options. Now, I mentioned Shadowlands is doing a little bit of an overhaul. There are some more hairstyles and stuff coming as well, I think. But once again, that's in the future. This is what WoW looks like right now, and it's pretty cool. You get to do some pretty cool customizations. You can look, I love the tongue, it's just so creepy. They do creepy really well, and I've always found, you know, an undead rocking out with his emote is just classic WoW for me. Moving on from here, we have Black Desert Online. Now, Black Desert Online is known to be bad in some areas, but character creation is actually quite positive when it comes to the actual changes you can do to your race. Though the more I thought about it, there is some negative aspects to this, as that you're kind of locked with a base starting model for each of the classes. You're not able to shift it too much, and there's some classes that are I guess all of the classes are technically race locked or gender locked, I mean, but there's kind of variants of specific classes that are either male or female, right? So there's a little bit of options there, but if you want to be a very specific class, you have to look very similar to everyone of that class. And it gets kind of weird because whenever they release a new class, a lot of people make it, so there'll be a ton of people who look very similar running around, which gets kind of confusing. But yeah, so it's kind of a negative in that regards, but there is so many different classes, and that's once again a topic for a different video, that you do have certain character models that are going to probably appeal to you. It's just hopeful that the actual class mechanics pair up well and also appeal to you. But yeah, so we're just going to scroll through these all, you know, and give you a good feel for all of them, and then we'll get into the actual customization, which is really where Black Desert wins. There's quite a bit you can do, and the actual graphics, I mean, in this game are just stunning, right? Like if you're looking at just the graphics and the changes you can do to a character, this game really blows things out of proportion. But yeah, so we'll go to a very basic looking character. I think it actually shows the most that you can do when you look at a humanoid, which is interesting because a lot of the other games, I find it more interesting to look at the more unique of the races, whereas here the graphics are so realistic that it's actually more impressive to look at a regular person and see what you can do. So you see here we have a lot of different haircuts that we can play with. I don't go through all of them, but there is a ton of options. And then when it comes to the actual cut, you've chosen it, there's a ton more you can do to customize it from there. You can do the curls, you can do kind of like different lengths in different areas. You can do how thick or thin it is. You have the 2-tone color or even 3-tone color, which just gives you all of this depth. And it actually took me a long time to figure out what all of these different sliders and colors were doing. Because for a while I was just clicking buttons and nothing was changing, and then I had to change the opacity. It was crazy. One of the things that you will note as well is that there is a fair bit of aging you can do to your character, as well as sort of like shine or sweat. So you can actually give them kind of an appearance of more rugged or more taken care of as well. So you can really add kind of that personal flavor to your character and make them feel quite unique. As you're going to see this character turn out here. You can make quite the monstrosities in Black Desert Online as well. You're able to stretch a lot. Like, look at all the different things you can pull out here on the face to just shape the face exactly how you want it to be. And I feel like they're able to offer this amount of customization, once again, because there is kind of that base character look that each of the classes has to be, right? And because of that, they're able to offer more customization on that one look. So if it happens to be a class and a look that you love, you're going to have so much fun creating your character. I mean, the amount of times I've come back to Black Desert, I think it sounded like I said Black Dessert. That's not what I said. Black Desert. the biggest enjoyment is making my new character. Like, I'm always super excited to get in there and spend like an hour creating this perfect character to grind and then get bored of eventually. But I'm okay with it. This freaked me out. You can really choose how much you express your teeth in a lot of these different things, and it can get pretty weird. So that was just the head part, and I'm like speeding this up as much as I can, but you you have a lot of things you can choose. Obviously, you have the choice of making yourself super muscular or super out of shape. You can make yourself super tall, super thin, and then it comes into all the different sort of tattoos and stuff you can do. I always like to give really cool tattoos and stuff like that, but then I never see them because of my gear. You can also create these different poses, which are interesting, and could maybe get sexual. I didn't hear, but you can do these kind of interesting I was going for a choke here, and it got really weird where I tried to like get this around my neck, but I didn't quite get there. But yeah, pretty cool, right? Look at that. Yeah, so you get to see all the different like already created animations as well and give a good feel for your character. And there are some sort of horoscopes and stuff like that to give some backstory. But it's all about the customization of the looks in this game. You can do so much. So moving on, we have the Elder Scrolls Online, and the first thing you should know about me is that yes, I've really been enjoying ESO, but I actually don't know much about Elder Scrolls, so a lot of the races that I get to play and the different alliances and stuff like that, you know, it didn't mean as much to me on a like a lore perspective. So I was really looking at the face value of the kind of characters and the aesthetics of the characters that you get to create. And from that perspective, it's kind of underwhelming. In my personal opinion, you have cat people, you have lizard people, you have sort of human orcs, you kind of have human elves, and then you have a whole bunch of different humans that are almost the same but kind of different colors. So I found it kind of underwhelming in terms of what you could create in terms of other games like GuildWars 2 and Final Fantasy XIV, where there was just more options. That being said, the two unique races, the cat people and the lizard people, do feel very distinct, and I can't actually say I've played a lizard person in any other game. The cat has kind of been done in a lot of different games, but the lizard feels very, very unique, and the way they do the tail does feel quite fun, like when you're walking around in your plate gear and you just have a tail wagging. It feels quite good on a lizard. But yeah, you have the different characters and they can all play the different races, which is a big plus in my mind. The big thing that just kind of pay attention to is the alliances. It doesn't matter as much for PvE content, and you know, battlegrounds aren't a thing anymore for groups, because that used to be the way you could kind of PvP together if you were on different alliances, but now you can't group with your friends, so it's kind of a null point. And they do matter for the big serial PvP, like the big world PvP. That's where alliance truly matters, but it does kind of shape where you'll do your quests and stuff a little bit if you want to follow your alliance story, but you have a lot of freedom there, so don't get too, you know, focused on that. But yeah, we're gonna go with a lizard person. I think they are the most unique, and they're definitely one of my favorite races from this game. They also have really good racial passives, which are a pretty big thing in this game. I haven't mentioned it up in any of the other games yet, because it hasn't impacted me quite like ESO has, where I do actually consider which race I'm gonna make for each of the different classes, because it can make a fair bit of difference if you're trying to min-max. But yeah, so you can do a fair bit with the different sliders here. You can make yourself look like a more heroic lizard. I don't know how they determine that. And you can change the color of your body to make yourself different shades of green and blue, which is pretty cool. And then once again, very much like the Sylvari, there's a ton of different patterns you can choose. Not quite as many options in terms of the actual like different colors of the pattern, but you do get a lot of variety here. And I typically spend a lot of time trying to make myself cool, but not a snake, because snakes are gross. So I'm sorry snake lovers. I'm scared of snakes. I don't know what it is. And if I start looking like a snake out there, I'm gonna be terrified. Yeah, so you can do a lot. You can do a lot of different sliders for the different parts of your body. They don't change a ton. Like it's not gonna be the end of the world. I think the biggest thing I was able to do was give this guy a pretty big gut, which was interesting to have kind of a fat lizard. I imagine him being kind of like a tank or something like that with some big heavy armor. But yeah, you can make quite the different face for your lizard, and then their big thing is the different head sort of horns and flaps and stuff like that. Like, you can make very different looking lizards this way, where you can see that it's just the horns on the outside and stuff that are changing. Like, the actual shape of the face isn't controlled by the slider, but I do look quite different with each of them. One of the biggest things, and you just saw me do it here, is the age slider. Now, on a lizard, you might not know this, but they get wider noses when they get older, and it's maybe not as an effective way of me showing that slider, but if you did it to a human, they do look kind of like an old grandpa when you use it, and it's a very easy way for players to kind of give that aged look to their character. Specifically, a lot of mages and stuff like that, whenever I'm making a sorcerer in this game, I want to make him kind of an old Gandalf looking man, and the age slider really does a good job of that, and it makes it really, really fun. You have a bunch of other sliders that kind of do nothing. Like, a lot of these, it's interesting because some sliders do a ton, and some of them, like, you barely notice a difference. So there's a lot of variety there, which is interesting to play with. You do get to look at your gear as well, and give yourself a little spin, but that's what you got there. There is your lizard ready for action. Whew, there you have it. What a long video this turned out to be, and this is with the footage sped up a fair bit. You don't even want to see what the first take of this looked like, because obviously I do one take and don't take a bunch of breaks, ha ha ha. But yeah, we are now at the part where I share my opinion, and you guys get to say how stupid it is in the comments, right? But no, let's get on with it. It's a hard decision, it really is. There's pros and cons to all of the different ways you can have a character creation selection. The way I'm gonna sort of say the winner here is I'm gonna do kind of 2 runners up and then do my winner. If I don't say a game that you love, it's not because I hate the game, it's because I think this is an area that they might not have all the other games beat. But yeah, let's get into it. I think one of the obvious standouts is Black Desert Online. The amount of customization you can do for a specific look is crazy. Like, you can make yourself, you could look, you know, like your actual person if you wanted to. It's an insane amount of tools you have to create the absolute perfect avatar for you in game. The downside, once again, is that there is kind of that specific character model for each of the classes, and if you don't like that, you're kind of out of luck. Our next runner-up is going to be GuildWars 2. I think they have so much freedom when it comes to the ability to put any race with any class that it's really, really nice, and they do have a fair bit of customization on top of that, but more than anything, each of the races feels well planned out, has a very specific lore in the Guild Wars 2 universe now, and feel very distinct and different from each other. Whereas games like Elder Scrolls Online, like I say, there's a ton of races, but a lot of them feel very, very similar, or at least look very, very similar. The winner of this section for me is Final Fantasy XIV. And I didn't realize this on my first time creating my very first character, but coming back to it, the amount of different races they have, and it ranges from very far out there races to more traditional, you know, fantasy style races. There's kind of something for everyone, which is really nice. That, paired with the ability to choose any of the races for your class, really gives you a fair bit of freedom. Now, the one strike against it is that there are those 2 races that are gender locked. That's never a fun time, but what are you going to do? It really does offer a lot of customization. Even when you do choose a race and a class that you like, you can really shape yourself and your hair and make yourself look just the way you want. I think that's my winner, but don't let me shape your opinion. Now is the time for you to vote. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think makes a character creation for an MMORPG, and which do you think is the best right now? Maybe it's not even one I mentioned in this video, and if that's the case, be sure to mention it in the comments below. Hopefully all of you enjoyed this video. If you did stick around to the very end, thank you so much. It really does make a difference. If you wanted to go the extra mile and leave a like, subscribe, comment, that would mean the world to me. And if you had any thoughts on what we should do for future comparisons, being, you know, either the topic of the video or the specific games that you want to see compared, feel free to leave those in the comments below. I do take suggestions. I actually have created a lot of these videos based on a specific comment, so definitely feel like you should put that there. I love it. But thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you in the next video.